When people think about the greatest mobile games they've ever played, they usually think about two games: Plants vs Zombies and Angry Birds. And actually, Plants vs Zombies wasn't even a mobile game. It was actually started off on PC, that then became a mobile game, and it translated so well, in fact, that when PopCap and EA Games decided to release Plants vs Zombies 2, they had it released on mobile, and they didn't have it released on PC or console or even 3DS, from what I've heard. And there were very two classic games that released early on when mobile games were a very new thing. This was around, I think Plants vs Zombies released 2009. I don't exactly know when Angry Birds released, but they released around the same time. And this was like revolutionary, right? Because mobile games were a very brand new industry. People didn't really know like what to play. And so guess what? Plants vs Zombies and Angry Birds were basically the only competition they had. They basically had each other as their competition, and they were very simple games too, right? I think what it appealed to a lot of people was just simplicity, right? Complexity has become sort of a new thing that games are starting to do now, and especially mobile games, they're starting to take on more complexity. But back then, a lot of people just liked simple games, right? They like being able to, you know, like throw the birds at the pigs and then kill them, or they like to be they like to put on plants in the garden and shoot the zombies, right? It was a very simple genre that didn't require much thinking, but it was just a lot of fun, right? It was very simple. It was a lot of fun, and I think that for a lot of people, like the genre, just the mobile game genre was just like a brand new industry, and they could see so much potential in it. You know, later on games, Geometry Dash, all those games are released. But I think for a lot of people, when they think of like OG, like good games, it usually comes down to two: Plants vs Zombies and Angry Birds. And in my opinion, I'm more of a Plants vs Zombies kind of guy. I'm not a like Angry Birds was fine. I played many of the Angry Birds. I played the classic Angry Birds. I played the Star Wars Angry Birds. That one was actually a really good one because they had plenty of abilities with that. But for me, I think Plants vs Zombies stick out a lot because it's sort of this new take on the tower defense genre that like balloons tower defense, like and all those games had, right? Where instead of like balloons or whatever going down one lane and you just focus on that one lane, right? Plants vs Zombies had it where you had five separate lanes and you had to make sure each lane was protected, or else you would lose. And I think another mechanic that I really like was the lawnmower mechanic, right? Where if everything was going on one lane, right? Like all the giants, all the imps, all that stuff, right? And you couldn't handle it. Guess what? The lawnmower could take out all of them in one go, and you had one last chance to ensure that lane was protected. And I think that Plants vs Zombies 2 in particular had a lot of potential, but unfortunately EA Games kind of just made it a bit of a cash grab. And I've even heard actually that Plants vs Zombies, not the original game, it's not like necessarily a cash grab, but they have it to where the OG Plants vs Zombies, Plants vs Zombies One, if you want to call it that, it just has so many ads now, right? And back then the strat was just simply, oh, just turn on airplane mode, have the Wi-Fi off or have no data, stuff like that, right? But now they have it to where you can only play 3 levels before you have to turn back on, before you have to turn the Wi-Fi back on. And I was just like, dude, there's no way they're trying to make the mobile game of Plants vs Zombies like so bad, because that was what accelerated Plants vs Zombies popularity, right? It was so popular they made a Plants vs Zombies 2. They even did, spin-offs of the Garden Warfare. That was a really good game. That was a really good spin-off too. And Angry Birds did something similar too. Angry Birds plenty of spin-offs. They did Angry Birds Go. They did Angry Birds Epic, which was another great spin-off. And they even made movies. Angry Birds, right? Angry Birds movie, Angry Birds One, right? They made a second one. I don't know if they made a third one, but they made movies off of that game because it was just that popular. And I think for a lot of people, they really they go down kind of like one or two paths where they think Plants vs Zombies or Angry Birds is better for multiple reasons, right? Angry Birds, to me, Angry Birds didn't like appeal that much to me. It was a simple game. It was a fun game, but in my opinion, it was sort of like this. You would always try to find the meta in this one level, and you could just restart it multiple times. I mean, same thing with Plants vs Zombies, but like with Plants vs Zombies, you could usually have one meta stick out throughout all the levels up until you get to like one specific level where you need to have this one plant, right? I'm like an optimizer kind of guy, I like to, because I think Angry Birds, you definitely have to adapt a lot more, right? You have to use this bird for this specific task, or this bird for this specific obstacle, whatever, or this specific material, whatever, right? For me, I always like to stick with the same meta and then try to like optimize it and try to make it like as good as I can without having to switch strategies. That's just how I am. And Plants vs Zombies especially made that extremely possible, right? The classic strat for me for most levels, assuming it wasn't like the roof level where you had to have the cabbage pole, you had to have the watermelons, all that stuff, was you would have a double P shooter, multiple of them in fact, right? And then you have the torchwood, just flame that ball up. And before the torch wood would be the frozen pea shooter, but now it's a torch wood, just extra damage. Put like a tall walnut over, and not a walnut. I forgot his name, but put like one of those tall walnuts over there. Boom, that was a strat, and you could just optimize it the entire way through. That, in my opinion, was such a I like Plants vs Zombies for that because you could always optimize it like extremely good. And unfortunately, it just sucks because with Plants vs Zombies 2, I think they did actually make it better in a way that you did have to adapt a lot more compared to the OG, which while it's not my type of playstyle, I do understand why people do enjoy that playstyle a lot. One of my online friends, she plays Plants vs Zombies too. She doesn't play the OG one for some reason, even though it's good. Although, I guess to be fair, the original has a bunch of ads, which kind of sucks. And to me at least, Plants vs Zombies was, and especially if you play Endless too, Endless, man, that was a, one of the things I did for Endless was that I would just have like double sunflowers across the entire, like the map, right? I would have one zombie attacking this one walnut, and then once I had maxed out all my sun, right, I would put all the plants in. But basically, I try to have all the first level, right, of Endless. I just try to have all the plants in, like set up, ready to go, and then by the time it was over, I had like all this leftover stuff that I could use to replace, my plants that they needed to, right, and I think that one level I particularly liked was the roof one because the roof one was what really they had nights. It's cool. You can get sun. You had to plant sunflowers to get sun. You couldn't and also to the pool level was kind of cool. They had 6 lanes instead of 5, and 2 of them were in the pool, so you had to put lily pads and all that stuff. That was a great genre. And but for me, I think the roof level. I think for a lot of people, the roof level was actually really good because you couldn't use because all the plants you had obtained, you could technically use them, right? The night plants you couldn't really use them, but you could use them as like shields, perhaps. Then I forgot the plant's name, but the one that causes like 0 sun, you could put that as a shield, all that stuff. Um, but with roof, literally, you couldn't use the night or most of the day plants. You had to quite literally use a new you had to use a new plant type that could only shoot over. And the cabbage pole was sort of like the pea shooter. The corn one was not he wasn't strong, but when you had the butter and you just boom, it was like a frozen pea shooter essentially, except much weaker. And then the watermelon one was a great one, man. And and then when you get to the boss level, right, of Plants vs Zombies, it was a very fun game. It was a good boss level because there would always be new stuff happening, right? He would throw stuff on your plants, so you have to replant them all, or he would throw frozen. He would like make ice, like make a huge ice ball, and it was rolling towards you. You have to use like a jalapeno to destroy that ice ball, or it'd be a fireball, and you have to use the ice plant, whatever his name is, and it was just a fun boss level, and it felt enjoyable to finally unlock everything afterwards. Now this is the all Plants of Zombies. Angry Birds. It was cool, like and Star Wars in particular. That one actually was a very fun one because they had new abilities that you didn't have in the OG. I think they had I believe they had a space one as well, which was different also Star Wars, where you could just where instead of like it going like this, like a regular curve, they would have a curve like this where you could kind of like rotate around the planet and just attack from behind or something like some crazy stuff like that. Like it was, Angry Birds was fun. Personally, to me, I didn't particularly I wasn't particularly like attracted to like Angry Birds that much. I never like it wasn't that I didn't enjoy the game. It's just like that specific genre to me didn't appeal that strongly to me. Although the one game I did play was Angry Birds Epic, and it was for some reason like Angry Birds Epic was like a very good spin off on Angry Birds. Honestly, in my opinion, it technically shouldn't have worked. To be honest, like it really shouldn't have worked, but it just did. It was just this sort of not RPG game, but it was this game where you would have like 3 Angry Birds, right? You would go up against like a wave of pigs, and you would just like try to defeat them all, use abilities, use armor and all that stuff, and it was just and I don't know, it was just sort of like a fun twist on Angry Birds, and it's a shame that Angry Birds Epic was deleted now because like it's been gone. I think you have to like fucking change your location to Zimbabwe or something just to be able to play it, which is so weird. And then Plants vs Zombies, they had Garden Warfare, and Garden Warfare shouldn't have worked. It was a third-person shooter, but it worked so well, in fact, they had Plants vs Zombies Garden Warfare 2, which was even better. And that's gonna be this whole topic, but I'm trying to specifically talk about the mobile games. But I think what Angry Birds and Plants vs Zombies inevitably succumb to, like most mobile games or really games in general, is just greed, right? Plants and Zombies 2 in particular, there's a lot of greed. Some plants are locked behind paywalls, right? Or even if they aren't locked behind paywalls, if you want to upgrade them, right, it costs a lot of time, it costs a lot of money, right? So what do you do? Do you spend a lot of time in the game, or do you spend a lot of money in the game? Angry Birds had this problem too, but it wasn't as prevalent, I think, in Plants and Zombies 2. What they really what their main problem was that they had spin-offs that just weren't great. They had Angry Birds Pop Blast. What's the point of Angry Birds Pop Blast, right? Angry Birds Pop Blast, like it was literally like a Candy Crush, type of game, except you had Angry Birds. Okay, cool. Like what's kind of the point? There wasn't really a point. And you could say the same with like Angry Birds Go, the racing game they had, or Angry Birds Epic, but those games worked out really good. They've had success before that. Angry Birds Pop Blast, whatever it was after Angry Birds Epic and Angry Birds Go. I don't understand why they they didn't like learn from those lessons, thinking like, hey, how can we make this game stand out, even though it's sort of taking on this same genre, right? I really don't understand. And so, and it sucks too because a lot of the Angry Birds games are locked behind paywall, which I guess to be fair, they kind of were already, but there's that too. And oh, there was I forgot what the Angry Birds pig game was, but there's like this pig game where you could like make like a flying vehicle or car or something like that, and you could just kind of like just ride it and just like do whatever. I actually haven't played that game, but that does look pretty fun. But yeah, Angry Birds and Plants vs Zombies were like the two OG like mobile games, and I think they actually shaped the mobile industry. Well, maybe not nowadays, but they try to shape the mobile industry to have like games that are simple, but they're still so much fun, right? Because a game with complexity can still not be fun, right? It could have all this story, it could have all this lore, mechanics or whatever, right? But if it's not fun, at the end of the day, it's not fun, right? Plants Zombies and Angry Birds were very very simple games, right? Like babies could play it, right? And they could understand it, and they could play it. But honestly, because of its simplicity, it was actually so fun, right? You didn't really have to learn much. You could just enjoy it for what it was. And so I think that's the reason why Plants vs Zombies and Angry Birds were two of the greatest mobile games. In my opinion, I think Plants vs Zombies is the better one, but you could argue with it in the comments.